If you've recently gone through a divorce, there's definitely some financial steps that you should take to get your financial life, financial picture in order. And in this video, I'll be going through what some of those steps are. Welcome back. This is episode 213. This week's episode, I'm going to finish up my three-part series on divorce. Last week, I had an attorney, Renee Bauer, on, and we talked about some of the financial issues you might encounter when going through divorce. And the week before, I talked about what you should do to get prepared financially to go through a divorce. Well, this week I'm going to wrap it up and talk about what you should be doing if you've already gone through a divorce, steps that you should take to really get your financial life in order. So the first thing that you need to do is get organized. And I mentioned this in my first episode on this series, but being organized is really an important part of your financial planning, your financial life at all times, especially when going through a divorce, because taking over your finances might be new to you. Maybe your spouse was the one who was managing the finances, and now you're going to be managing the finances of your household. So one of the first things that everyone should have and should be continually updating is a balance sheet or statement of net worth. And on that balance sheet or statement of net worth, you'd first list out your assets. They would go on the left-hand side, and that would be things like checking accounts, savings, CDs, money market, other investment accounts. Then you want to list out any retirement accounts that you have, valuables such as real estate, jewelry, art, and then you want to list out any physical assets like real estate, land, vehicles, and that would all go on the left-hand side as your assets. And then on the right-hand side, you list out any debts that you have, any credit cards, any mortgages, any student loans, any lines of credit. And very simply, the difference between your assets minus your liabilities is what your net worth is. So it's an important step in really being organized in your financial plan is knowing what your net worth is and how that is. And over time, you probably should be updating this on a semi-annual or annual basis to know how your net worth is doing. If you're saving up for retirement and you're not yet retired, you're still working, your net worth should be increasing over time because you should be saving money and building that net worth and growing those assets. When you go into retirement, most likely it will start going down because you're going to start spending down your assets. But if you don't have any idea where that stands to start, it's hard for you to be able to measure it. The next document or worksheet that's really important is to put together some type of budget, some type of way that you have an idea of what your expenses are for your household and also to be able to track where your money's going. There's lots of online tools and apps that you can use for budgeting. That's one way you can do it. Another way is that you can just use an Excel sheet and you can track your budget. And if you want to get a copy of the budget worksheet that I use for myself and my clients, and also a copy of the net worth statement that I mentioned earlier, if you go to retirewithryan.com/podcast/213, because this is episode 213, you can get the show notes for this episode, and in there I have a link to both of these documents if you want to download them for free. So within that cash flow budget worksheet, you'll want to list all your expenses, your fixed expenses, such as household expenses that you have, insurance, any health insurance, and really come up with your essential expenses. And then next list what your wants are. So how much do you want to spend on vacation or certain luxuries that you might have? And you want to come up with that number of what your total expenses are so that you have a handle as far as where your money's going. And that can be a way for you to track how you're doing and how you're keeping yourself either on track with your expenses or off track. And that's where those budgeting apps can be a little more helpful because they can be done in real time with a little less effort. But you want to have an idea of what your expenses look like. The next thing you want to do is review your insurance coverage that you have. And if you have minor children, maybe as part of the divorce decree, you or your spouse were supposed to maintain a certain amount of life insurance. Maybe that wasn't part of the divorce decree. So if it wasn't, but you have minor children, or you want to maintain a certain amount of life insurance, probably the easiest way would be to get some type of term life insurance. Term life insurance doesn't have a cash value component, so it's going to be the least expensive way to get insurance. And you could either get $100,000, $200,000, or greater, and know that that's going to cover you for a specified term. Let's say it was 10 years or 15 years. So that's something you might want to look into. Next, you want to look under insurance, check out your health insurance. Do you need to make any changes to your health insurance? Do you need to remove your spouse from the health insurance plan if you're no longer going to be keeping them on your plan? Maybe you need to add your children on your plan, or maybe take them off, depending upon if you have minor children, how you or your spouse are going to share the health insurance coverage for your children. The next type of insurance to look at is your disability insurance through work. Maybe you didn't have disability insurance before because your family didn't think it was necessary, but now if you're single, it's really important to make sure you have the proper amount of disability insurance, so you could sign up for that potentially through your employer. Now, you have to check with your employer to see if you can make these changes at any time, or you might have to wait until the open enrollment period to make these changes. But it's an important thing to be reviewing the insurance coverages through your employer if you're looking to make any changes with your health insurance, life insurance, or your disability insurance. The last type of insurance to think about is long-term care insurance. It's definitely an expensive type of insurance to have. It's not for everyone. I've talked about it in past episodes. But the fact that you're going to be single now, maybe you don't have family or friends who could take care of you in the event that you had a long-term illness or disability. So that's where the long-term health insurance could come in to help you have that type of care and support. So that's something that you might want to look into. Next thing you think about is your overall debt that you have and whether or not you're going to be taking on any more debt. Maybe it's necessary as part of the divorce. So a good starting point for that is looking at your credit score and seeing where it stands. There are 3 main credit agencies: Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, and all of them offer you 1 free credit report per year. So if you've never done so, if you go onto one of their websites for free, you can download your credit report. You definitely want to make sure the information on there is accurate and get a handle onto where your credit score is. Maybe there's some things you can do to improve your credit score, paying down some debt, or making sure your payments are made on time. But this will give you an idea if you go to borrow any money. Maybe you need to buy another house, buy another car as part of the divorce. But having an eye on your credit score can be important, because the better your credit, the lower the interest that you're going to be paying on any loans. So that can be very helpful. So that's why it's a good idea to have a handle on your credit. And then if you're not going to be using your credit, you may want to freeze your credit. That's another thing that you can do. You could freeze your credit, and then you can make it available whenever you need it. You can unlock it, you can unfreeze it, but in the meantime, you can protect it from anybody else abusing it. Now, if you are going to take on debt, it's just important that you understand what your financial ratios look like. And what I mean by that is there's a certain amount of debt to income that lenders will lend up to. And generally, that's about 43% of your gross income. So let's just say you're making $100,000 a year. The most that lenders would usually allow you to borrow would be debt payments of $43,000 a year. Now, that is extremely high debt to income ratio. You probably want to keep it below that, probably in the 30% range, mid-30s, maybe even lower. But having an idea of where that stands now can give you an idea of what you may be able to borrow. If you're thinking of buying another home or you want to buy a car, it can give you an idea of what you may be able to afford. The next thing is to think about whether you want to hire a financial advisor to help you. Now, obviously, this is a lot of stuff, I'm going to cover in this episode, but you can do it on your own, but also a financial advisor can be very helpful in helping you with your finances and making decisions on what to do with your finances. So I'm a big fan of using a fee-only financial advisor. I've talked about that in past episodes. I've written a book on it. So if you're unfamiliar with what a fee-only advisor is, that's an advisor who's legally obligated to put your interest ahead of their own and disclose any conflicts of interest. And this isn't the norm. Most advisors do not work this way. So this is going to help you to find an advisor who's really looking out for your interests at all times. If you want to learn more about this, you can always check out my book called Fiduciary: How to Find, Hire, and Establish an Aligned and Trusted Partnership with a Fee-Only Advisor. It talks about how to find an advisor, how to hire them, what they'll help you to work on, and just some overall general financial planning concepts. And you can learn more by heading over to retirewithryan.com/book. The next area of your financial plan that you'll want to think about is your retirement plan. Do you have a retirement plan? Meaning, what is your goal? What is your plan? How long do you have to work until? How much do you have to save? What is the amount of money that you really need to be able to retire? If you have a pension, how much will that pay you? How much are you going to get from Social Security? These are all things that you really need to be thinking about when it comes to retirement planning. And if you were the spouse who wasn't handling this, maybe your other spouse was, it could be a good time to update it. Or if you've gone through a change with your assets, maybe you had to give your other spouse part of your assets as part of the divorce settlement, or maybe you received part of your ex-spouse's assets as part of the divorce settlement. So these are all things that you really need to think about and factor in to your retirement plan. Also, as part of this, looking at your investments, what's your investment strategy, what's your investment allocation. That's an important part too of your overall financial plan. So this is where looking at this can be a really good idea in getting a plan in place, but also if you work with a financial advisor, they can be helpful in walking you through all this. The next area of your financial plan to think about is your estate plan. If you don't have a will, this can be a good time to get one. If you had a will, you probably want to review it and talk to an attorney to see if you need to update your will. Chances are, if you were married, your spouse, your ex-spouse was your executor. Maybe they were the primary beneficiary of your estate. If that's no longer your wishes as part of your divorce, then you'll want to update your will and make those changes, as well as possibly making any changes to the beneficiaries of your estate. There's a few other documents that you'll probably need to update as well. One is called the financial power of attorney. That allows someone to make financial decisions on your behalf. Again, if you're married, it's usually a spouse. So if you no longer want your ex-spouse to have that power, you might want to designate a new person. That can be a family, friend, or even an attorney. As well as a healthcare power of attorney. That allows someone to make healthcare decisions on your behalf. And again, if this was your ex-spouse, you no longer want them to do this, you will need to update this document. So that can be a good time to reach out to an estate planning attorney if you want help with this. I have a number of episodes on estate planning, but you also could do some of this on your own. You can do things online like through LegalZoom or trustandwills.com. There's a number of websites out there that you can get these things updated if you don't feel you need an attorney, or maybe you just don't have the time to meet with one yet. Next thing within your estate is really looking at how your assets are titled. How are your bank accounts titled? How are any non-retirement accounts titled? Meaning, were they joint tenants with rights of survivorship with your ex-spouse? Well, if that's the case, you'll probably want to remove your ex-spouse from those accounts unless you want your ex-spouse to get those assets and be able to access them. So you'd want to either move those into single name, or you can move those into something else called transfer on death. So transfer on death, or TOD, or sometimes called payable on death, is a way that you can designate beneficiaries on non-retirement accounts. So things like bank accounts, brokerage accounts, investment accounts. And whoever you name on those accounts will receive those assets when you pass away, but while you're alive, they don't have any access to them. So if you have children or family members or friends who you want to get those assets, one way that you can leave them to them is through designating them as a TOD or POD beneficiary on these accounts. So how would you do that? Reach out to your bank, reach out to your investment company, and they'd have you fill out a form. And within that form, you would then designate who would receive those assets. Upon your passing, they just contact the bank or financial institution, provide your death certificate, and the assets easily go to them. If instead you just leave those in single name and you do the work of updating your estate by getting a will, the estate will then dictate where those assets go after going through probate. And the probate process can take 9 to 12 months, and there can be additional probate fees. So if you want to circumvent that process, you can use these TOD or POD accounts as a way to speed up the assets going to who you want and also cutting down on the cost. The next thing to think about is updating beneficiaries on any accounts that allow you to name beneficiaries, like retirement accounts or life insurance. It's a good idea to see who you have as the beneficiary. If it was your ex-spouse, you probably want to update that. Make sure you get that updated. You'd be surprised how many people overlook this, and then their assets go to their ex-spouse where they really didn't want them to. And lastly is just putting all this together in a way that is going to make it easy for your family to be able to tackle your estate on the event of your passing. So one way to do this is through what's called an I love you letter. It's a document that you can list out all your assets, where they are, who your beneficiaries are, and any additional information about your funeral requests. And if you want to check out a copy of one of these letters that I have, if you head over to retirewithryan.com/podcast/213, because again, this is episode 213, I'll put a link for that I love you letter as well. And this will just make it a lot easier on your family upon your passing. And you'd probably want to keep this document along with your other financial documents, your will, healthcare power of attorney, and other things somewhere where your family can easily find them. And a good idea is to buy a fire-safe, watertight box. You can buy these on Amazon and store everything there and let your family or executor know where to find this so that things will be protected. So I know this is a lot of steps I've laid out, and you're probably not going to tackle this all at once, but if you've recently gone through divorce and you want to get your financial life back in order, I suggest you go back and work through these steps and get your finances in the place where they need to be. And as I mentioned, maybe a fee-only financial advisor can also be helpful in getting you organized and helping you go through all this. If you have a question you want to have considered for a future episode, you can always head over to retirewithryan.com and click on Ask a Question. Have a great week, and I look forward to talking to you next Wednesday. Take care.